The millionaire froze when he realized the poor waitress who served him is his wife who died 7 years ago. Then he does something that changes everything. The crystal chandeliers of Luciano's cast warm amber light across white tablecloths, creating an atmosphere of old money elegance that Richard Collins barely noticed anymore. He'd been to this restaurant 100 times, maybe more. Business dinners, client meetings, the occasional attempt at moving forward that always ended with him going home alone to that empty mansion in Malibu. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Chen, his potential investor from Singapore, sat across from him, going on about quarterly projections and market expansion. Richard nodded at the right moments, smiled when appropriate, but his mind was somewhere else. It was always somewhere else. 7 years. 7 years since the night everything shattered. So, what do you think, Richard? The Asian market is ripe for... The words died in Marcus's throat as Richard's wine glass slipped from his fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, tumbling through the air before exploding against the marble floor in a burst of crystal shards and red wine that looked too much like blood. Every head in the restaurant turned, but Richard didn't notice. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move, because standing there, not 20 feet away, was a ghost. She wore the standard server uniform. Black slacks, white button-down shirt, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. But it was her. The same chestnut hair that caught the light just so. The same green eyes he'd dreamed about for 7 years. The same delicate curve of her jaw. The way she tilted her head slightly to the left when she was thinking. Isabel. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to break free. The restaurant sounds. The clinking silverware. The murmured conversations. The soft jazz playing overhead. All faded into white noise. There was only her. She approached their table with a professional smile, grabbing a napkin from a nearby station. "I'm so sorry about that, sir. Are you all right? Let me help you clean this up." That voice. God, that voice. It was the same voice that used to whisper, "Good morning," against his neck. The same voice that laughed at his terrible jokes. The same voice that said, "I do," on a beach in Monterey 6 months before everything went to hell. "Isabel." His own voice came out strangled, desperate. She paused, confusion flickering across her features as she knelt to pick up the larger pieces of glass. "I'm sorry, sir. My name is Lena. You must be thinking of someone else." Before he could stop himself, Richard reached out and gently grabbed her wrist. She looked up, startled but not frightened. "Not yet. Please," he whispered. "Look at me." And she did for a moment. Just a brief, beautiful moment. Something flickered in those green eyes. Recognition, confusion. He couldn't tell, but then it was gone, and she carefully pulled her hand away. "I really am sorry, but you've got the wrong person." Her smile was kind but firm. "I'll have someone bring you a new glass right away." Richard watched her walk away, his entire world tilting on its axis. Marcus was saying something, probably asking if he was okay, if he needed water, if they should reschedule. But Richard's eyes tracked her across the restaurant, memorizing every movement, every gesture. She moved exactly like Isabel. That slight bounce in her step, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear even when it wasn't in her face. Small things, intimate things, things only he would notice. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, pulling up the photo he kept in a locked folder, the one he looked at every night before bed, even though it killed him a little more each time. Isabel on their wedding day, laughing in the golden California sunlight, her dress billowing in the ocean breeze. He looked up at the woman serving tables across the room. Same face, same everything. "Richard." Marcus's concerned voice finally broke through. "Man, you look like you've seen a ghost." The laugh that escaped Richard's throat was bitter. "Maybe I have." He'd replayed that night 7 years ago 1,000 times. The storm that came out of nowhere, battering the California coast with sheets of rain. Isabel driving home from a charity event while he finished up a late meeting. The phone call at 2 a.m. from the police. The car found at the bottom of a ravine near Point Doom, crushed beyond recognition. No body, just her purse, her phone, and enough blood to tell them she couldn't have survived. They'd searched for weeks. Helicopters, search parties, dive teams combing the rocky coastline. Nothing. The ocean had taken her. They said, the currents were brutal that time of year. They'd found nothing because there was nothing left to find. Richard never believed it. He'd spent hundreds of thousands on private investigators, psychics, anyone who promised even a sliver of hope. His friends called it unhealthy. His business partners worried about his judgment. His therapist, the one he'd seen exactly 3 times before quitting, said he needed to process his grief and move forward. But how could he move forward when every instinct in his body screamed that she was still out there? And now, impossibly, she was. "I need to go," Richard said abruptly, standing up. The room spun slightly. Or maybe that was just him. "But we haven't even ordered. Send me the contracts. I'll look them over." He pulled out his wallet, threw down $500 bills. "Dinner's on me. I'm sorry, Marcus. Something's come up." He didn't wait for a response. His feet carried him toward the back of the restaurant, where he'd seen her disappear into the kitchen. A manager intercepted him, all polished concern and professional boundaries. "Sir, I'm afraid guests aren't allowed. The waitress? The one with brown hair? Where is she?" "Sir, I really can't. Please." The word came out broken. "I just need to know her name. Her full name." The manager hesitated, probably seeing something desperate and wild in Richard's eyes. Something that said this man was 2 seconds away from losing it completely in the middle of his upscale restaurant. "Lena Moore," he finally said. "She's been with us about 5 years. Good employee, always on time." 5 years. Isabel had been gone for 7. Richard made it outside before his legs gave out. He leaned against the building, cold night air burning his lungs as he tried to process what he'd just seen. It was impossible. Insane. People didn't just come back from the dead, but that birthmark. He'd seen it. Just a glimpse when she'd leaned down to clean up the glass. A small mark near her left ear, shaped like a crescent moon. Isabel had been self-conscious about it, always hiding it with her hair. He used to kiss it and tell her it was perfect. And the scar, there on her chin, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, from when she'd fallen off her bike at 9 years old, requiring 3 stitches. She'd told him that story on their 3rd date, laughing about how dramatic she'd been. Convinced she was going to die, his phone was in his hand before he'd made the conscious decision to call. The private investigator he'd kept on retainer all these years, even when everyone told him to let it go. "Richard, it's late. Is everything?" "I found her," Richard interrupted, his voice shaking. "I found Isabel. I need you to find out everything about a woman named Lena Moore. Everything. Where she lives, where she came from. Any records you can dig up. I don't care what it costs." There was a pause on the other end. "Richard, we've been through this. The odds of, I saw her tonight. It's her. I know it's her." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "All right, give me what you've got." As Richard rattled off details, the restaurant name, the physical description, the timeline, he stared up at the night sky, somewhere up there. Was this some kind of cruel joke, or was it a second chance? He thought about the room in his house, Isabel's room. He'd kept it exactly as she'd left it that night. Her clothes still in the closet, her perfume still on the dresser, her book on the nightstand, bookmark still on page 247. Everyone said it was unhealthy, that he needed to pack it up, move on, start living again. But what if he'd been right all along? What if some part of him always knew she was out there? Waiting to be found, Richard pushed off the wall and headed for his car. Sleep wasn't happening tonight. He had work to do, because the woman in that restaurant might call herself Lena Moore. But Richard Collins knew the truth. His wife was alive. Richard didn't sleep. By sunrise, he was already on his 4th cup of coffee, sitting in his home office surrounded by documents, photographs, and the ghosts of 7 years' worth of dead-end investigations. James Chen, no relation to Marcus, called at 8 a.m. sharp. The private investigator had been on Richard's payroll since month 2 of Isabel's disappearance. Initially hired to find her, then kept on retainer for, what? Hope. Stubborn refusal to accept reality. Richard had never quite articulated it, even to himself. "You're not going to believe this," James said without preamble. "Lena Moore appeared out of thin air 7 years ago, and I mean literally. No birth certificate, no social security records before that date. Nothing." Richard's grip tightened on his phone. "Tell me everything. 7 years ago this February, a Jane Doe was brought into County General. Severe head trauma, multiple contusions, basically beaten to hell, found wandering on a service road near Topanga Canyon, covered in blood, no ID, no purse, no phone. The kicker, she had complete retrograde amnesia, couldn't remember her name, where she was from, anything before waking up in that hospital bed. Richard's heart was racing. Topanga Canyon was less than 15 miles from where they'd found Isabel's car. Go on. She spent 2 years in and out of treatment, physical therapy, cognitive therapy, the works. Social services helped her get a new identity. Lena Moore, the name's completely fabricated, by the way. Lena after the social worker who helped her. Moore because it was generic. She worked at a women's shelter to cover her bills, then landed the server job at Luciano's 5 years ago. Been there ever since. Medical records, Richard said. Can you get them? Already on it, but it'll take a few days. Hospital records from 7 years ago aren't exactly easy to access. Even for me. James paused. Richard, I have to ask. You really think this is her? I know it's her. Richard looked at the framed photo on his desk. Isabel laughing, windswept and beautiful. The birthmark, James, the scar on her chin, the way she moves. It's her. Even if you're right. She doesn't remember you. Doesn't remember anything. You understand what that means. Richard understood perfectly. It meant his wife was alive but didn't know she was his wife. Didn't know she was Isabel Collins, daughter of Robert and Patricia Morrison, Stanford graduate, nonprofit director. The woman who'd spent her honeymoon arguing about whether dogs or cats made better pets. The woman who loved thunderstorms and hated cilantro and could never finish a book without crying. Even the happy endings, all of that, just gone. I need everything you can find, Richard said. I need to understand what happened to her. After hanging up, Richard stood at the window overlooking the Pacific. Somewhere out there, Martha Jenkins was probably starting her day, making breakfast in the mansion's industrial kitchen, going through the motions of the dutiful housekeeper she'd been for 15 years. Martha, 45, efficient, invisible in the way good help always was. She'd been with the Collins family since before Richard married Isabel. Had she cried at the wedding? He couldn't remember. Had she seemed upset when Isabel died? Everyone had been upset. It was a tragedy. But now, staring at the ocean, something nagged at him. Something he'd never quite put together. Martha had always been. Devoted, maybe too devoted. Always there when he needed something. Always anticipating his needs before he voiced them. After Isabel's death, she'd been a constant presence, bringing him meals he didn't eat, making sure the house stayed exactly as Isabel had left it. Since that's what he wanted, never pushing him to move on, never suggesting he date, never mentioning the untouched room upstairs. Richard had assumed it was respect, professionalism. But what if it was something else? He pulled out his phone again, scrolling to a number he hadn't called in months. Thomas Reed, his driver, reliable, quiet, had been with him almost as long as Martha. Thomas had driven Isabel to that charity event the night she disappeared. He'd been questioned by police. Cleared. Never considered a suspect. The call went to voicemail. Richard didn't leave a message. Instead, he made a decision that would have seemed paranoid if his wife hadn't just returned from the dead. He called a security company, not the one that handled his current system, but a competitor. Within 3 hours, technicians were installing hidden cameras throughout the mansion, bedroom, living room, kitchen, all the common areas, and most importantly, the garden where staff often took their breaks. Motion activated, the lead technician explained. Records to a cloud server you can access from anywhere. They're virtually invisible. Your staff won't know they're there. Perfect, Richard said. Because if his instincts were right, if something about that night 7 years ago didn't add up, he needed to know. And he needed proof. The rest of the day crawled by. Richard tried to work, tried to focus on the merger Marcus wanted to discuss, but his mind kept circling back to Luciano's, to Lena, to Isabel. He wanted to go back immediately, plant himself at that restaurant and never leave. But he couldn't. Not yet. He'd already spooked her last night, grabbing her wrist like some desperate lunatic. If he wanted to get close to her, to help her remember, He needed a strategy. That evening, Martha knocked on his office door carrying a dinner tray. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, all of it looking perfect and tasting like sawdust. Probably. "You didn't come down for dinner," she said, setting the tray on his desk. "I was worried." Richard looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Moosey brown hair pulled back in a bun, plain features, serviceable clothing, the kind of woman who blended into the background, who people forgot was in the room. "Thank you, Martha. That's very thoughtful," she smiled, and something in that smile made his skin crawl. "Of course, Mr. Collins. I'm always here for you, you know that. How long have you been with the family now? 15 years. 15 wonderful years," she confirmed. "I remember when you first brought Miss Isabel home. Such a beautiful couple you made." The way she said Ms. Isabel, with just the slightest emphasis, the faintest hint of something sharp beneath the sugar, made Richard's instincts flare. "You must have been devastated when she died." Martha's expression shifted, something flickering behind her eyes too quickly to read. "We all were, Mr. Collins, such a terrible tragedy. But life goes on, doesn't it? We have to keep moving forward." After she left, Richard stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and logged into the new security system. All cameras were online, recording. If Martha or Thomas or anyone in this house knew something about Isabel's disappearance, eventually, they'd slip up. Everyone always slipped up. His phone buzzed. James, sending through preliminary information. Richard opened the file, scanning quickly. Medical reports from County General Jane Doe, approximately 25-30 years old. Severe blunt force trauma to the head. Multiple contusions consistent with physical assault. Richard stopped breathing. Physical assault. Not a car accident. Not injuries from a crash and subsequent fall down a ravine. Someone had beaten her, badly enough to cause traumatic brain injury and complete memory loss. Someone had done this to Isabel on purpose. The implications crashed over him like a wave. The car at the bottom of the ravine. The blood. The missing body. It had all been staged. Someone had hurt her, taken her somewhere, left her to die or disappear. But she'd survived. Somehow, against all odds, she'd survived and wandered into that hospital with no memory of who she was or what had happened. Richard's hand shook as he continued reading. Defensive wounds on her arms, bruising around her wrists consistent with restraints, evidence of drugs in her system, Rohypnol and something else the doctors couldn't identify. This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder, and whoever did it thought they'd succeeded. Richard looked up at the ceiling, at the floor above where Martha was probably tidying up the kitchen, where Thomas might be in his quarters above the garage, where his supposedly loyal staff lived their lives in his home, possibly harboring the darkest secret imaginable. He pulled up the live camera feeds, cycling through each one. Martha in the kitchen, humming as she wiped down counters. Everything looked normal. Everything looked innocent. But Richard knew better now. 7 years ago, someone had tried to kill his wife, had drugged her, beaten her, left her for dead, and she'd been walking around Los Angeles this whole time with no memory, no protection, no idea that someone might want to finish the job. His phone was in his hand again. Dialing James. "I need police records from the accident. Everything they collected, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, particularly anything related to Thomas Reed. The driver, Richard, he was cleared. I don't care. I need everything. And James, start digging into Martha Jenkins too. 15 years of employment history, background check, everything. You think your own staff. I think my wife was beaten half to death and left to die, and everyone assumed it was a car accident. I think someone staged the whole thing. And I think whoever did it is still out there, still close, possibly still in my own house." The line was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll have everything by tomorrow." After hanging up, Richard walked to Isabel's room. He stood in the doorway, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume, looking at her things exactly as she'd left them. For 7 years, this room had been a shrine to grief, but Isabel wasn't dead. She was alive, serving tables at Luciano's under a borrowed name, with no memory of the life she'd lost, or the husband who'd never stopped looking for her. And somewhere, the person who'd tried to kill her was still out there. Richard made a silent promise to the empty room, to the ghost that wasn't really a ghost anymore. He would find out who did this. He would protect her. And somehow, some way, he would help her remember, even if it destroyed him in the process. Richard returned to Luciano's 3 days later. Not immediately. That would seem desperate, obsessive. He needed to appear normal, coincidental, just another wealthy businessman who happened to enjoy their wine selection. He requested a different section this time, but his eyes found her immediately. Lena moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing trays, smiling at customers, completely unaware that her entire world was about to shift on its axis. She didn't notice him at first. Richard ordered the filet mignon, a bottle of Bordeaux he didn't care about, and waited. When she finally approached his table to refill his water glass, recognition flickered across her face. "Oh, you're the gentleman from the other night." Her smile was polite but cautious. "The one who broke the wine glass. Richard Collins." He extended his hand, keeping his voice casual. "And I owe you an apology. I mistook you for someone else, someone I used to know." Lena hesitated, then shook his hand. Her touch sent electricity through him, the same hand he'd held 1,000 times, the same fingers he'd memorized. "Lena Moore, and it's okay. Happens more than you'd think. Apparently, I have one of those faces." "I doubt that," Richard said, then caught himself. "Too much. I mean, you seem pretty distinctive to me, but again, I'm sorry for the confusion. And for grabbing your wrist, that was completely inappropriate." "It's fine, really." She tucked that strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture that still made his heart ache. "Can I get you anything else?" "Actually, yes, I'm terrible at wine pairings. What would you recommend with the filet?" It was a simple question, an easy opening. Lena relaxed slightly, falling into the comfortable rhythm of her job. She recommended a Cabernet, explained the notes, and Richard listened like she was revealing the secrets of the universe. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard became a regular, not every night. That would be suspicious. But 3, sometimes 4 times a week, always requesting Lena's section when possible, always polite, never pushy. He learned to time his visits to her shifts, learned which nights she worked late, which nights she seemed tired. He asked questions, casual ones, where she was from. She didn't know. If she had family, she didn't. What she did in her free time. Not much. Work kept her busy. He shared carefully curated pieces of his own life. The tech company, the house in Malibu, but nothing about Isabel. Not yet. Slowly, incrementally, Lena began to warm to him, started recognizing him when he arrived, sometimes holding his usual table. Their conversations extended beyond wine recommendations to books, to music, to the small observations about life that build connection. "You're here a lot," she said one evening, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Don't you have a kitchen at home?" "I do, but it's a big house. Gets lonely eating by yourself." Something in her expression shifted. Understanding. "Maybe. I get that. My apartment's tiny, but some nights the silence is deafening." Richard saw his opening. "Maybe we could break the silence together sometime. Coffee, lunch, completely casual. No pressure." Lena bit her lip. Another gesture so achingly familiar it hurt. "I don't really date much, actually. I don't date at all. It's complicated." "I'm not asking for a date, just coffee, 2 lonely people, slightly less lonely." He kept his tone light, non-threatening. "Unless you're worried I'm some kind of serial killer who stalks waitresses." She laughed, actually laughed, and Richard's heart soared. That laugh, he'd thought he'd never hear it again. "Okay, coffee, but somewhere public because you might be a serial killer." "That's fair," Richard said, grinning. Very practical thinking. They met at a cafe in Santa Monica 3 days later. Neutral ground. Morning sunlight streaming through windows. People everywhere. Safe. Lena arrived right on time, looking nervous in jeans and a simple blue sweater, without the work uniform. She looked younger, vulnerable. Richard fought the urge to pull her into his arms, to tell her everything, to beg her to remember. "So," she said, stirring her latte, "tell me about you, the real you, not the guy who eats fancy dinners alone 4 nights a week." Richard had prepared for this. He talked about his company, about growing up in Sacramento, about losing his parents young. All true. He talked about loving the ocean, about morning runs on the beach, about being a workaholic who'd let his personal life slide. What about relationships? Lena asked. You said you eat alone, but you're obviously... you seem like someone who'd have people in your life. I was married once, Richard said carefully. She died 7 years ago. Car accident. Lena's expression softened immediately. I'm so sorry, that's terrible. It was, still is, some days. He met her eyes. You never really get over losing someone you love. You just learn to live around the hole they leave behind. I can't imagine, Lena said quietly. I literally can't. I don't have memories of losing anyone because I don't have memories of anyone. Does that make sense? The amnesia. Yeah. 7 years of just nothing. Before that, sometimes I wonder who I was. If I had people who missed me. If somewhere out there, someone's still looking. She laughed, but it was hollow. Probably not. If I mattered to someone, they would have found me by now, right? Richard's throat tightened. Maybe they tried. Maybe they've been looking this whole time and just hadn't found you yet. That's a nice thought. Lena smiled sadly. But I don't think that's how the world works. Over coffee, Richard learned about her life, the fragments she'd built from nothing, the shelter where she'd worked, the social worker who'd helped her, the tiny studio apartment in Culver City that was all she could afford, the dreams that plagued her sometimes, flashes of places she couldn't identify, faces she couldn't name, a persistent feeling that she'd forgotten something crucial. Do you ever see anything specific? Richard asked, keeping his voice casual. In the dreams, water sometimes, the ocean, and this feeling of being happy, really. Truly happy? Then it slips away and I wake up feeling like I've lost something important. But I don't know what. She shook her head. My therapist says it's probably just my brain trying to create a past since I don't have one. Or maybe they're real memories trying to surface. Maybe. Lena didn't sound convinced. Anyway, enough about my brain damage. Tell me more about this company of yours. They talked for 2 hours. When they parted, Lena agreed to see him again. Dinner this time. Nothing fancy. Just 2 people getting to know each other. Richard drove home with his heart hammering. It was working. Slowly, carefully. He was weaving himself back into her life. But every word felt like walking a tightrope. Too much truth too fast. And he'd lose her. Not enough. And she'd never remember. At home, Martha greeted him with her usual efficient smile. Good afternoon, Mr. Collins. How was your morning? Fine. Just some errands. He headed toward his office, then paused. Martha, do you remember the night of Mrs. Collins's accident? The details? Martha's smile flickered. Of course, such a terrible night. The storm, the phone call. Why do you ask? Just thinking about it lately. Thomas drove her to the event that night, didn't he? Yes, but he wasn't driving when the accident happened. She'd sent him home. Said she'd drive herself back. You remember? Richard did remember. Or rather, he remembered being told that. Right, of course. He went to his office and pulled up the security feeds from the past 2 weeks. Hours of footage, most of it mundane. Martha cooking, cleaning, going about her duties. Thomas washing cars, doing maintenance, smoking cigarettes in the garden. But then, 3 days ago, late at night, Martha and Thomas in the garden, speaking in low voices. Richard cranked up the audio, straining to hear. Can't keep doing this forever, Thomas was saying, agitated. What if he finds out? He won't, Martha replied, her voice cold. It's been 7 years. There's nothing to find. You said that before, but he's acting strange, going out more, asking questions. Thomas, calm down. Richard's just lonely. Probably finally trying to move on, meet someone new. That's good for us. Means he's letting go. Richard's blood ran cold. Letting go of what? And why would that be good for them? He watched as Martha placed a hand on Thomas's arm. We've come too far. Made too many sacrifices. I won't let anything ruin this now. What about the money when... Soon, Martha interrupted. But we have to be patient. If Richard remarries, if he moves on completely, then we make our move, not before. The conversation ended. Both of them heading back inside. Richard sat frozen, his mind racing. What money? What sacrifices? What move? His phone buzzed. James, I've got something. Martha Jenkins isn't who she says she is. Her background before working for you. It's fabricated. Social Security number belonged to someone who died in 1998. And Thomas Reed, he's got a sealed juvenile record, assault charges, dropped on a technicality. Richard closed his eyes. They're involved. They did something to Isabel. It's looking that way. I'm trying to get the sealed records opened, but it'll take time. In the meantime, be careful if they suspect you know something. I will. Just keep digging. I need proof before I can go to the police. After hanging up, Richard looked at the frozen image of Martha and Thomas on his screen. 7 years. They'd been under his roof for 7 years, probably congratulating themselves on getting away with attempted murder. But they didn't know Isabel was alive, and they certainly didn't know Richard had found her. That was his advantage. The only one he had. His phone buzzed again. A text from Lena. Thanks for coffee. Same time next week. Richard smiled, typing back. Absolutely. Looking forward to it. He would win her trust. He would help her remember, and when the time was right, he would make sure Martha and Thomas paid for what they'd done. Even if it meant using Lena, using Isabel, as bait. The thought made him sick. But what choice did he have? The relationship between Richard and Lena evolved slowly over the following weeks, each meeting carefully orchestrated yet appearing spontaneous. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became long walks along the Santa Monica Pier where the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility. Richard moved with the patience of a man defusing a bomb. One wrong move, one slip of the truth, and everything would explode. But every moment with her was exquisite torture. Seeing Isabel's mannerisms and Lena's movements, hearing his wife's laugh from a stranger's throat, watching the woman he loved fall for him all over again without knowing they'd already lived this story. You're staring again, Lena said one evening as they sat on the pier, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. You do that sometimes, like you're trying to memorize my face. Richard forced a smile. Sorry, occupational hazard. I spend all day analyzing data, looking for patterns, hard to turn it off. What patterns do you see in me? Her tone was playful, but something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition she didn't understand. Honestly, you're hard to read. Most people telegraph their thoughts. Nervous habits, micro-expressions. You're different. Like you're constantly guarding something, even from yourself. Lena's smile faded slightly. My therapist says it's a defense mechanism. When you don't know who you are, you learn to be careful about what you show people. Never know when you might accidentally reveal a piece of yourself you haven't discovered yet. That sounds exhausting. It is. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening wasn't cold. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role in my own life. Lena Moore, waitress, survivor, mystery woman with no past. But underneath, I don't know who I really am. Richard wanted to tell her. God, how he wanted to tell her everything. That she was Isabel Collins, nonprofit director, Stanford graduate, daughter, wife, that she loved French films and hated horror movies, that she could never resist rescuing stray animals and cried at commercials, that she was brave and passionate and kind, and he'd loved her since the moment she'd spilled coffee on him at a bookstore 7.5 years ago. Instead, he said, maybe who you are now is just as real as who you were before. Maybe both versions are true. That's very philosophical. Lena turned to look at him, her green eyes catching the dying light. You're different too, you know. Most guys who ask me out, not that many do. They want to fix me, like I'm a project. You don't do that, because you're not broken, Richard thought. You're just lost. I think you're doing fine fixing yourself, he said aloud. They sat in comfortable silence, watching seagulls wheel against the darkening sky. Then Lena spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I had another dream last night, about the ocean. Richard's heart rate kicked up, but he kept his voice casual. Yeah, what happened? I was on a beach, wearing a white dress, like a really fancy white dress, and I was laughing. Really, truly happy. There was music, people around me, but I couldn't see their faces. Just feelings. Joy. Love. Like everything in the world was perfect in that moment. She paused. Then I heard a voice. A man's voice, saying my name, but not Lena. Something else. I couldn't make it out. What did the voice sound like? Warm, safe, like coming home. She laughed self-consciously. I know it's probably just wishful thinking, my brain inventing a past where I was loved. Or maybe it's a memory trying to surface. Lena turned to him, something desperate in her expression. Do you really think so? Because sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy. These dreams, they're so vivid. And sometimes during the day, I'll see something, a place, a color, a smell, and I'll get this overwhelming sense of déjà vu, like I've been there before, done it before, but I can't remember when or with who. Richard took a calculated risk. Has anything triggered that feeling recently? Actually, yes. When I met you. She held his gaze. That first night at the restaurant. When you grabbed my wrist and called me Isabel. For a second, just a split second. Something shifted, like a door trying to open in my mind. But then it slammed shut. Richard's throat tightened. And now, being around me, it's still there. That feeling. Like I should know you. Like we've met before in some other life. She laughed nervously. I know how that sounds. Like a bad pickup line. It doesn't sound crazy. Richard chose his words carefully. What if your instincts are right? What if you do know me somehow? But how? I checked into that hospital 7 years ago with nothing. If I knew you, if I had any kind of past with you, wouldn't you have found me? Wouldn't you have been looking? Maybe I was looking in all the wrong places. They locked eyes, the air between them charged with unspoken questions. Then Lena broke contact, turning back to the ocean. Sometimes I think it would be easier if I could just remember, she said quietly. Whatever happened to me, whoever I was, knowing would be better than this constant void. Other times I'm terrified. What if I was a terrible person? What if I did something awful, and that's why no one came looking? I don't believe that. How can you know? You just met me. Because, Richard said, I'm pretty good at reading people, and everything about you. The way you treat people, the kindness in your eyes, the way you apologize when you've done nothing wrong, tells me you're a good person. Whatever happened before, whoever you were, I'd bet my life that person was good too. Lena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me, at least that I can remember. Over the next few weeks, Richard carefully introduced elements from Isabel's past. Watching for reactions, he took Lena to a small French restaurant in Beverly Hills. They'd celebrated their first anniversary there. She ordered the coq au vin without looking at the menu, then seemed surprised by her choice. I don't even know if I've had this before, she said, confused. But I just knew I wanted it. He played music in his car, their wedding song, Miles Davis's Blue and Green. Lena went quiet, staring out the window with a distant expression. I love this song, she whispered. I don't know why, but it makes me sad and happy at the same time. He bought her coffee, a very specific order, grande latte with an extra shot, oat milk, no foam. She took a sip and looked at him, startled. How did you know that's exactly how I like it? Lucky guess, but they both knew it wasn't. The evidence mounted, the birthmark near her ear. Richard had glimpsed it again, shaped exactly like the crescent moon he'd kissed 1,000 times. The scar on her chin from the childhood bike accident, the way she gestured when she talked, hands painting pictures in the air, the slight limp in her right leg that appeared when it rained, from a college soccer injury she wouldn't remember one evening. Richard took her to Monterey, claiming he had business near the coast. In reality, he wanted to see if the beach house would trigger anything. They walked along the shore at sunset, and Lena stopped suddenly, swaying on her feet. Are you okay? Richard caught her elbow. I've been here before. Her voice was distant, dreamlike. I know this beach, those rocks, that house. She pointed to a weathered cottage perched on the cliff, the rental where they'd spent their honeymoon. Richard, I've been here. I know I have. It's a popular beach. Maybe... No. She turned to him, eyes wide and slightly frightened. I can see it. Fragments. Running in the sand. Laughing. Someone chasing me. Happy, so happy. Why can I see this but not remember it? Maybe you're starting to remember. Maybe being here is bringing it back. Lena pressed her hands to her temples. It hurts. Like there's this wall in my mind and something's trying to break through, but it can't. God, it's like having an itch I can't scratch. Richard pulled her into his arms. The first real embrace they'd shared. She tensed initially, then melted against him, and for a moment, everything felt right. She fit against his chest exactly as she always had, her head tucked under his chin, her breath warm through his shirt. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're safe. Why do I feel like I've heard you say that before?" "Because you have." Richard thought, 100 times, 1,000. Every time you had a nightmare, every time you were scared, every time the world felt too big and too cruel, as they stood there on the beach where they'd promised forever to each other 7 years ago. Richard felt the weight of his deception. He was manipulating her, using her own lost memories against her. But what choice did he have? Tell her the truth too soon and she might run, might think him crazy, might never remember on her own. And time was running out. Back in Malibu, Martha and Thomas were growing restless. Richard had captured more conversations, vague references to plans, to waiting long enough, to finishing what they started if necessary. Whatever they were plotting, it involved getting rid of him, which meant they'd discovered he was getting close to something, or they were simply ready to cash in on whatever scheme they'd been nursing for 7 years. "Richard," Lena's voice pulled him back. "Where did you go just now?" "Sorry, work stuff." "You do that too. Disappear into your thoughts." She pulled back to look up at him. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? You haunted by a past you can't forget. Me haunted by one I can't remember. Maybe that's why this works. Is this working? What we're doing?" "I think so." "Don't you?" Lena smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes and crinkled their corners. "Yeah, I think so. It's terrifying. But in a good way. Like I'm finally waking up after 7 years of sleepwalking. If only you knew how right you are," Richard thought. They drove back to La as stars emerged overhead. Lena fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head against the window, face peaceful in a way Richard rarely saw when she was awake. He wanted to reach over and touch her, to push that stray curl behind her ear, to tell her everything. Instead, he drove in silence and made plans. Soon, very soon, he'd have to show her the truth. The photographs, the videos, the life she'd forgotten, the medical evidence proving what had been done to her. And when he did, he'd have to pray that her mind was ready, that the fragments trying to break through would finally shatter that wall, because Martha and Thomas were running out of patience, and so was he. Richard sat in his office at 2 a.m., the glow of his laptop screen the only light in the room. On one monitor, security footage played in real time. Martha moving through the darkened mansion, checking doors, her movements efficient and purposeful. On the other, James had sent through a 50-page document detailing everything he'd uncovered about Richard's employees. The truth was worse than he'd imagined. Martha Jenkins, or rather, the woman using that name, had been born Martha Brennan, grew up in foster care in Nevada, bounced between homes until aging out of the system at 18. Then the trail went cold for nearly a decade before she resurfaced with a stolen identity and impeccable fake references. The real Martha Jenkins had died in a house fire in 1997. No one had checked. Thomas Reed's sealed juvenile record had finally been cracked. Assault at 15. He'd beaten his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend so badly the kid spent a week in the hospital. Charges dropped when the victim's family moved out of state and declined to testify. But the pattern was there. Violent tendencies, poor impulse control, a willingness to solve problems with his fists. Separately, they were damaged people trying to escape their pasts. Together, they were something far more dangerous. Richard scrubbed through more security footage, weeks of recordings compressed into hours. He watched Martha and Thomas's secret garden meetings, their whispered conversations, the way Martha touched his arm with casual intimacy that spoke of a relationship far beyond employer and employee. Then he found it, the smoking gun. 3 weeks ago, late at night, Martha and Thomas in the garden. The audio was grainy, but Richard cranked the volume and enhanced it through his computer's software. "Getting too close," Thomas was saying, pacing. "He's asking questions about that night, about the accident. What if he figures it out?" "He won't." Martha's voice was cold, controlled. "It's been 7 years. The car was incinerated. The blood evidence was conclusive. There's no body to find because the ocean took care of that problem. Richard's blood turned to ice. But what if She's dead, Thomas. Martha's tone was final. Even if she survived the fall, even if she somehow crawled out of that ravine, she'd be brain dead from the drugs we gave her. There's no way she could have. You said that about the first attempt. We left her bleeding on that service road and she still managed to walk to a hospital. Richard's hands shook so badly he had to pause the playback. First attempt. They'd tried to kill Isabel more than once. He forced himself to keep listening. That was different. We panicked. We weren't thorough. Martha's voice dropped lower. But the second time with the car, we made sure. Thomas, listen to me. Richard is not suspicious. He's lonely. He's finally trying to move on with his life. That's good for us. How is that good? If he moves on, he won't need us anymore. He'll sell this place. And we won't lose anything. Martha cut him off sharply. The money's already in motion. I've been skimming his accounts for 3 years. Small amounts. Nothing he'd notice. It's all offshore now. Clean and untraceable. Another year, maybe 2, and we'll have enough to disappear. And if he figures it out before then. A long pause. Then Martha's voice, flat and emotionless. Then we finish what we started. Make it look like an accident. Grief-stricken widower. Never recovered from his wife's death. Tragic suicide. We inherit as the loyal staff who tried everything to help him. Either way, we win. Richard stopped the playback, fighting the urge to vomit. These people, these monsters, had been living in his house for 7 years, eating his food, taking his money, planning his murder. And before that, they'd drugged his wife, beaten her, and tried to kill her. Twice. The first attempt must have been the one that left Isabel wandering near Topanga Canyon with no memory. The second attempt, staged as a car accident, had been designed to tie up loose ends, to make sure no one ever found her, but they'd miscalculated. Isabel hadn't been in that car. Someone else had been driving it off that cliff, or it had been empty. The blood planted. Richard made a note to have James pull the accident report. Examine every detail. His phone buzzed. James, as if reading his mind. You need to see this. I pulled the accident report from 7 years ago. The blood in the car. It was Isabel's blood type. But they never did DNA analysis. Why would they? They had her ID. Her phone? Everything pointed to her being the victim. But Richard, the amount of blood was wrong. Not enough for a fatal injury. Too much for a minor one. Like someone had staged it. They planted it, Richard said, his voice hoarse. They took her blood somehow. Maybe when they attacked her the first time, and used it to fake the accident. That's what I'm thinking. And there's something else. The car's brake lines were cut. Police assumed it happened in the crash. But the forensics report notes it could have been done beforehand. They just never pursued it because they thought they had a storm-related accident. Richard closed his eyes. They tried to kill her by staging a brake failure. When that didn't work. Maybe she never got in the car that night. Maybe she sensed something was wrong. They had to pivot. Stage the wreck anyway. Make it look like she died. Which means somewhere out there, there's evidence. Blood they took from her. Tools they used. Something that connects them to the crime. I need to search their rooms, their belongings, find proof before I go to the police. Richard, be careful if they even suspect. I know, but I don't have a choice. Lena, Isabel, she's starting to remember. And when she does, when she can testify about what they did, I need physical evidence to back it up. Otherwise, it's just the word of an amnesiac against 2 people with clean records. After hanging up, Richard sat in the darkness, planning. Martha and Thomas were creatures of habit. Martha left every Tuesday afternoon for what she claimed was a book club. Thomas had Thursday mornings off. That gave Richard windows of opportunity. But first, he needed to protect Isabel. Because if Martha and Thomas discovered she was alive, discovered that their victim had survived and was now in Richard's life, his phone rang. Lena's number. Richard glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. Hello, Richard. Her voice was shaky. Frightened. I'm sorry to call so late. I had another dream, but this one was different. It wasn't just fragments. It was... God. It was so real. What did you see? A woman. Brown hair. Plain looking. She was nice to me. at first, brought me tea. But then, Lena's breath hitched. Then she wasn't nice anymore. She was angry, screaming at me, saying I'd ruined everything, that I didn't deserve. She broke off. Richard, I think I remembered something. Something that actually happened. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. What else? Was there anyone else there? A man, tall, quiet. He held me down while Lena's voice cracked. There was a needle, a sharp pain. Then everything went black and I was falling. I could feel the ground rushing up, but I couldn't move. Couldn't scream, and I knew I was going to die. Martha and Thomas. Isabel had just described Martha and Thomas. Lena, listen to me. I need you to pack a bag. Right now. Don't ask questions. Just trust me. Can you do that? What, Richard? What's going on? I'll explain everything. But not over the phone. Pack essentials. Meet me at that cafe where we had our first coffee. The one in Santa Monica. Can you be there in an hour? You're scaring me. I know. And I'm sorry. But please just trust me. 1 hour. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Silence. Then, okay, 1 hour. Richard hung up and immediately called James. I need a safe house, somewhere off the grid, and I need it now. What happened? Isabel's memories are coming back. She dreamed about Martha and Thomas, about what they did to her. If they find out she's alive, if they realize she's remembering, they'll try to finish the job, James finished. I've got a place in Monterey, belongs to my brother, but he's overseas for the next 6 months. I can have keys ready in 2 hours. Make it 1. And James, I'm going to need the police, but I need more evidence first, enough that Martha and Thomas can't talk their way out of this. I'll keep digging, but Richard, at some point, you're going to have to tell Isabel the truth. All of it. I know. Tonight. I'm telling her everything tonight. After hanging up, Richard moved quickly through the mansion, grabbing his laptop, the backup drives with all the security footage, documents, everything he'd compiled. He left a note for Martha saying he'd be away on business for a few days. Perfectly normal. Nothing suspicious. As he walked to his car, he glanced up at the mansion one last time. Somewhere inside, Martha was sleeping, dreaming of stolen money and clean getaways. Thomas in his quarters, convinced they'd gotten away with attempted murder. But their time was running out. Richard had the evidence. He had Isabel. And soon, he'd have justice. He just had to keep her alive long enough to see it through. The drive to Santa Monica took 45 minutes through empty streets. Richard arrived early, parked where he could watch the entrance. At exactly 3:47 a.m., Lena appeared, a small duffel bag over her shoulder, looking scared and confused and so achingly young. Richard got out of the car. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. Okay, she said, walking up to him. I'm here. Now tell me what the hell is going on. Richard took a deep breath. Get in the car. We're going somewhere safe. And then I'm going to tell you a story about a woman named Isabel Collins, about what happened to her 7 years ago, and why the people who tried to kill her want to finish the job. Lena went pale. Richard, please just get in the car. And Lena, he met her eyes. I'm so sorry for everything you're about to learn, but I promise you, I'm going to keep you safe. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she nodded and got in the car. As Richard pulled away from the curb, heading north toward Monterey and the confrontation that would change everything, he made one final call. James, it's time. Contact the police. Tell them I have evidence of attempted murder, fraud and conspiracy. Tell them I have the victim alive and she's ready to talk, and tell them to get a warrant for Martha Jenkins and Thomas Reed. You sure about this? Richard looked at Lena in the passenger seat, her face pale in the dashboard lights, her hands trembling in her lap. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The beach house sat perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Dawn was breaking as Richard pulled in, painting the sky pink and gold. Lena had been silent most of the drive, hands clutched in her lap. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. Lena stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. Okay, we're here. Now talk. Richard had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but standing there, looking at her fear and confusion, all his planning evaporated. Your name isn't Lena Moore. It's Isabel Collins. And 7 years ago, you were my wife." Lena stared, then laughed, a sharp sound with no humor. "That's insane." "I have proof." Richard opened his laptop, pulled up their wedding photo. "This is you. This is us. June 14th, 7 years ago." Lena stepped closer, face draining of color. "That looks like me, but that's impossible. You would remember if someone hadn't tried to kill you and left you with brain injury that destroyed your memory." Richard pulled up more photos. "Isabel Morrison, Stanford graduate, nonprofit director. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears streamed down Lena's face. "Stop, please. I can't. Your car was found at the bottom of a ravine, blood everywhere, no body. Police declared you dead. But I never believed it. I spent 7 years looking. 3 weeks ago, I found you serving wine like nothing had happened. This is crazy." But Lena's hands shook. "That birthmark, I have that birthmark. Near your left ear, shaped like a crescent moon." Richard pulled up another photo. "And that scar on your chin, from when you fell off your bike at 9. Lena touched her chin. "How do you know that?" "Because you told me on our 3rd date. I told someone that recently I told..." Her eyes widened. "I told you, at the cafe." "How did you know?" "Because I already knew. I've known you for 8 years, loved you for 7.5. Deep down, you know I'm telling the truth. You've felt it since we met." Lena backed away. "If this is true, who did this to me?" "Martha and Thomas, my housekeeper and driver. They tried to kill you 7 years ago. Drugged you, beat you, left you for dead. When you survived with amnesia, they staged a car accident to make it look like you'd died. Why? Martha was in love with me. You were an obstacle, and they'd been embezzling from me." Richard pulled up the security footage. "This was recorded 3 weeks ago. Listen." Lena listened to Martha and Thomas discussing finishing what they'd started. Her face went ashen. "They're planning to kill you too." "They were, but they don't know I found you. That's our advantage. I've contacted police, but I need you to remember. To testify." "I can't. I don't remember." "Then we'll help you remember." Richard pulled out a box with artifacts from her life. Her favorite book, her perfume, her wedding ring. Lena touched the ring and gasped, eyes rolling back. Richard caught her. "I see it. You putting it on my finger. The beach, music, dancing. Everyone's crying, happy crying. This is the happiest day of my life. Do you remember my vows? I promised to love you through every season, through sunshine and storms." Lena focused on him, tears streaming. "You said you'd never stop looking for me. You'd find me. And I did." Lena looked at the ring. "This is real. I was married. I had you. And they took it from me. They took everything. Not everything. You survived." Richard touched her face. "And we're going to make them pay. But first, see this." He pulled up their wedding video. Isabel walking down an aisle of sand, barefoot and radiant. The first dance. Isabel's head on Richard's shoulder. "Blue and green," Lena whispered. "That song. I knew it. It was our wedding song." The video continued. Richard's voice, slightly drunk and completely in love. "I'm the luckiest man alive, Isabel. You are my forever." Present-day Lena was sobbing. "We were so happy. How could someone do this? Because some people are monsters. But they didn't destroy everything. We're still here." Lena pulled back, looked at him with red eyes. "I don't remember everything, but I remember enough. I remember loving you. I remember being Isabel. How long have you known?" "Since the moment I saw you. And you didn't tell me. You just let me fall for you again. I was afraid you'd think I was crazy or run. You manipulated me. Yes, and I'd do it again if it meant getting you back." Lena stared at him, then laughed. "I should hate you for lying. Do you?" "No, I think part of me always knew. My instincts recognized you. That's why I kept seeing you. Some part remembered you were safe, that you were home." The sun had risen, streaming through windows. Richard led Lena to the couch, wrapped a blanket around her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait. Police are getting warrants. You'll need to give a statement, but right now you're safe. And after, that's up to you. I can't expect you to just pick up where we left off." Lena was quiet, staring at the ocean. I may not remember everything, but I remember loving you, and the woman I am now. She loves you too. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. She smiled. Then I guess we have a lot to catch up on. We have all the time in the world now. Richard pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, waves crashed. For the first time in 7 years, Richard believed they were going to make it. But first, they had to spring the trap on Martha and Thomas. And that reckoning was coming soon. The morning passed in a blur of memories and tears. Richard showed Isabel pieces of their life together. Photo albums, videos, text messages he'd saved. With each image, more fragments clicked into place. It was like watching someone drowning finally break through to air. "I remember this," she said, pointing at a photo from a farmer's market. "I bought too many tomatoes, and we made sauce for a week. You gave half to the neighbors," Richard said. "Mrs. Chen said it was the best marinara she'd ever tasted." Isabel's smile faded. "Does she know that I'm alive?" "No one knows except James. I couldn't tell anyone until you remembered." Isabel reached for another photo. From the charity event the night she disappeared. She wore a midnight blue dress. Thomas stood in the background, barely visible. The moment she saw Thomas, Isabel went rigid. The photo slipped from her fingers. "He was there," she whispered. "At the event. Martha sent him to pick me up. Said you'd asked him to drive me home because of the storm. I didn't question it." Richard stayed still, letting the memory come. "We left early. I was tired. Thomas helped me into the car. Everything was normal. Then he took a wrong turn. I asked where he was going. He said construction, a detour. But I knew that road. There was no construction." Her breathing quickened. Richard took her hand, grounding her. "I tried to call you, but my phone was dead. Then Martha was suddenly there, hiding in the back seat. I tried to open the door, but the child locks were on. Martha had this look, not angry, calm, like she'd been planning this for years. "You don't have to. No, I need to remember. I need to say it." Isabel's grip tightened. "She said I'd ruined everything, that I'd stolen you from her. She'd been there first, been loyal, waited. But you chose me, some spoiled rich girl who didn't appreciate what she had." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice stayed steady. "Thomas held me down. Martha had a syringe, something to make me compliant. I fought. God, I fought so hard, but Thomas was too strong. I felt the needle go in, felt the drug spreading like ice." Richard's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, just held her hand. Everything went fuzzy. I remember being dragged from the car, some service road. Dark, isolated. Martha was yelling. Then Thomas hit me. Once, twice. I tasted blood, felt my head crack against something hard. Isabel touched her temple, where a faint scar was barely visible. I thought I was going to die. Everything was spinning. They left me there in the dirt. I heard Martha say something about the car, about making it look like an accident. Then footsteps, an engine, silence. How did you survive? I don't know. I should have died, but something refused to quit. I remember crawling, inch by inch, for hours. Then headlights. A truck driver found me just before dawn, took me to the hospital. And you had no memory. Nothing. The trauma, the drugs, the head injury. It all erased me. When I woke up, I didn't know my name, where I was, who I belonged to. I was blank. Isabel looked at Richard, her eyes fierce. They stole 7 years from me. 7 years of my life, my identity, my marriage. They took everything, but you survived. And now we make them pay. There's more. After they left me for dead, they panicked when I didn't die, when I showed up at a hospital. So they staged the car accident, used my blood, planted my belongings, made it look like I'd driven off that cliff. The brake lines were cut. They were tying up loose ends. If anyone came looking, they'd find the wreck and assume I was dead. And meanwhile, I was wandering with amnesia. No threat at all. Until now, Isabel agreed. They have no idea I'm alive. That's our advantage. Richard showed her James's text. Police got warrants. They're moving in tonight. Martha and Thomas will be arrested at the mansion by midnight. I want to be there. Isabel, that's not safe. I want to be there, she repeated, steel in her voice. I want them to see my face when they're arrested. I want them to know they failed. Richard studied her face. So different from the scared woman at Luciano's. This was Isabel Collins. 7 years hadn't erased that strength. It had just been buried. Okay, but we do this right, with police protection. You stay in the car until they're in custody. Deal. They spent the afternoon preparing. James arrived with Detective Sarah Martinez, who interviewed Isabel for hours, recording every detail. This is one of the strangest cases I've ever worked, Martinez admitted. But the evidence is solid. The security footage, the financial records, the medical reports. It all lines up. They're going down for attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. As sunset approached, they drove toward Malibu. Isabel was quiet, staring at the coastline. Richard knew that road. She'd driven it the night everything went wrong. Are you okay? No, but I will be after tonight, when they're arrested. Then I'll be okay. They parked 2 blocks from the mansion, hidden among other cars. Police vehicles waited, unmarked. Martinez sat in back with them, radio in hand. They're both home. SWAT's in position. We move in 10 minutes. Isabel's hand found Richard's in the darkness. He squeezed it, remembering the last time they'd held hands on this road. 7 years ago. Coming home from dinner, arguing playfully about which movie to watch. After this is over, Isabel said quietly, we have a lot to figure out. 7 years is a long time. We're different people. We are. But some things don't change. I still love you. I never stopped. I know. I can feel it. And I love you too. Both the you I'm remembering and the you I've gotten to know. But we can't just pick up where we left off. We need to rebuild, to learn each other again. I'd like that. Continuing our story, but with a 7-year intermission. Martinez's radio crackled. All units, we're green, move in. They watched as officers emerged from shadows, surrounding the mansion. The front door burst open, SWAT entering, voices shouting commands, through windows. They saw movement, chaos. Then 2 figures were led out in handcuffs. Thomas first, his face shocked and angry. Then Martha, struggling, screaming something they couldn't hear. That's them, Isabel whispered. That's really them. As Martha was pushed toward a police car, she looked up and locked eyes with Isabel. Even from that distance, the recognition was clear. Martha's face went white, then red with rage. She screamed, fighting her restraints, but officers subdued her and shoved her into the vehicle. She saw me, Isabel said. She knows I'm alive. She knows she failed. Good, Richard said. Let her know. Let her spend every day in prison knowing you survived, that you won, that all her planning was for nothing. They watched as both cars pulled away, after 7 years of living under Richard's roof, plotting and scheming. It was finally over. Martinez turned to them. We'll need you both at the station tomorrow for formal statements. But for tonight, it's done. They're in custody, and they're not getting out. Richard and Isabel stayed in the car long after everyone left, staring at the mansion. I never want to go back there, Isabel said. Too many ghosts. Then we won't. We'll sell it. Buy something new. Build new memories. I'd like that. They drove back to Monterey as stars emerged. Tomorrow would bring statements and legal proceedings and media attention. But tonight, they had each other. They had truth. And they had justice. After 7 years of darkness, the light was finally breaking through. The interrogation rooms at the Lapide Central Station were exactly as cold and sterile as they appeared in movies. Richard and Isabel sat in an observation room, watching through one-way glass as Detective Martinez prepared to question Martha Jenkins. Martha sat alone at a metal table, still in handcuffs, her mousy brown hair disheveled from the arrest. But her eyes, those eyes were sharp, calculating, darting around the room looking for cameras, exits, any advantage she could find. She doesn't look scared, Isabel observed quietly. She will be, Martinez said, entering the observation room. Give me 10 minutes with her. Thomas is already singing like a canary in the next room over. Threw her under the bus the moment we separated them. What's he saying? Richard asked. That it was all Martha's idea, that she manipulated him, promised him money and a life together if he helped her. He's painting himself as the victim of a master manipulator. Martinez's expression was grim. Classic criminal playbook. But the evidence doesn't care who had the idea. They both committed the crimes. Martinez left to enter the interrogation room. Through the glass, they watched her sit down across from Martha, open a thick file folder, and spread photographs across the table. Ms. Jenkins, or should I say Ms. Brennan, since that's your real name, you're in serious trouble. Martha's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. We have security footage of you and Thomas Reed discussing the murder of Isabel Collins 7 years ago. We have financial records showing you've embezzled over $3 million from Richard Collins over the past 3 years. And we have medical evidence proving that Isabel Collins, the woman you tried to kill, is alive and ready to testify against you. For the first time, Martha's composure cracked. That's impossible. She's dead. I saw what, Martha? Saw her bleeding on that service road. Saw her struggle as you and Thomas beat her and left her for dead. Martinez leaned forward. She survived, despite the drugs you pumped into her system, despite the head trauma, despite everything you did to erase her. She survived. Martha's face had gone pale. Where is she? I want to see her. Why? So you can finish the job. Martinez pushed a photograph across the table, a recent one of Isabel, smiling, very much alive. She remembers everything, Martha. Everything you did, everything you said, how you told her she'd ruined your life by marrying Richard, how she'd stolen your future. He was supposed to be mine. The words burst out of Martha. 7 years of obsession finally breaking through. I was there first. I took care of him, understood him, loved him when no one else did. Then she waltzed in with her perfect smile and her Stanford degree and her charity work. And suddenly, I was invisible. Just the help, easily replaced. So you decided to kill her. I decided to take back what was mine. Martha slammed her cuffed hands on the table. Do you have any idea what it's like watching the man you love marry someone else, serving them breakfast while they laugh about their honeymoon? Cleaning her bathroom, doing her laundry, pretending to be happy for them while you're dying inside. In the observation room, Isabel's hand found Richard's. He squeezed it tightly, his face a mask of controlled fury. Martinez remained calm. So you planned to murder her. I planned to free him. Martha's voice was eerily calm now, as if she'd disconnected from reality. She was the obstacle. Remove the obstacle. Comfort him in his grief. Eventually help him move on. With me, where he should have been all along. And Thomas Reed, where did he fit into this plan? Martha's expression hardened. Thomas was useful, strong, loyal, easily manipulated with promises of money and a better life. He'd do anything I asked, including beating a defenseless woman nearly to death. She fought. We only meant to drug her, stage an accident later. But she fought. And Thomas panicked. Things got messier than planned. Martinez pulled out another photograph, the medical report from 7 years ago. Messy. Is that what you call leaving someone with traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, and enough Rohypnol in her system to kill a horse? She wasn't supposed to survive. We left her on that service road. She should have died from exposure or the head injury. When we heard about a Jane Doe at County General, we panicked. But then we learned she had complete amnesia. No memory, no identity, no threat. Problem solved. Except it wasn't solved. You staged a second attempt, the car accident. Martha smiled. Actually smiled. And it was the most chilling thing Isabel had ever seen. That was brilliant, actually. We'd kept some of her blood from the first attempt. Thomas had the presence of mind to save it. We cut the brake lines on a car we'd stolen, planted her blood and belongings inside, and sent it over the cliff during that storm. Everyone believed she was dead. Richard mourned. Life moved on. Life moved on while you systematically robbed your employer and plotted his murder. Richard was never supposed to die. Not originally. Martha leaned back. But he never moved on. Never dated. Never showed interest in anyone. Just kept that shrine of a bedroom and threw himself into work. After 7 years, I realized he was never going to love me. So Thomas and I made new plans. Skim what we could, then stage Richard's suicide. Make it look like he finally gave in to grief. As his loyal, devoted staff, we'd inherit the estate, at least, enough to disappear and start over. Martinez pulled out more photographs, printouts of the security footage, bank statements, offshore accounts. You really thought you'd get away with it. We did get away with it. For 7 years, we lived in that house, took his money, and no one suspected a thing. Martha's smile faded. How did he figure it out? What gave us away? You did. You and Thomas got sloppy, started having conversations where you could be overheard. And Richard, he never stopped looking for his wife. When he found her alive, everything else fell into place. Martha's face contorted with rage. She ruined everything. Again, she should have stayed dead, should have stayed lost. That stupid, worthless... Careful, Martinez warned. Everything you're saying is being recorded. I don't care. I hope she heard every word. I hope she knows that I would do it all again. She took everything from me, and I was just taking it back. In the observation room, Isabel stood abruptly. I need to see her. I need her to see me. Isabel, I don't think... Richard started. I need this, please. Martinez stepped out of the interrogation room, and after a brief conversation, nodded her approval. 5 minutes. I'll be right there with you. Isabel walked into the interrogation room, and Martha's reaction was instantaneous. The color drained from her face, and for the first time, genuine fear flickered in her eyes. Hello, Martha, Isabel said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Surprised to see me. You're supposed to be dead, Martha whispered. I was supposed to be a lot of things. A wife, a professional, a person with memories and identity. You took all of that from me. Isabel stepped closer. Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up in a hospital with no memory, no name, no past, to spend 7 years wondering who you were, if anyone missed you, if you mattered to anyone? Martha said nothing. Her eyes locked on Isabel like she was seeing a ghost. You stole 7 years of my life, 7 years of my marriage. You drugged me, beat me, left me to die in the dirt like garbage. And when I survived, you tried to erase me completely. Isabel's voice grew stronger. But you failed, Martha. I'm alive. I remember. And I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life in prison, thinking about how completely you failed. I loved him, Martha said, her voice breaking. I loved Richard more than you ever could. You didn't deserve him. Love. Isabel's laugh was bitter. You don't know the first thing about love. Love doesn't destroy. Love doesn't kill. What you felt was obsession, possession, and it's going to cost you everything. Martha lunged across the table, but the handcuffs and Martinez's quick intervention stopped her. You self-righteous bitch. You have no idea what it's like to want something you can't have, to watch someone else live your dream. You're right. I don't know what that's like, because I'm not a psychopath. Isabel turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Martha, Richard, and I are renewing our vows in 6 months. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to think about it every single day in your cell. How we survived, how we won, how your 7 years of planning and violence amounted to absolutely nothing. She walked out, leaving Martha screaming obscenities behind her. In the observation room, Richard pulled her into his arms. That was incredibly brave. That was incredibly necessary, Isabel corrected, but she was shaking. I needed her to know she didn't break me. Martinez returned, satisfaction on her face. Well, she just confessed to everything on camera. Between her confession, Thomas's testimony, and all the physical evidence, this case is airtight. They're both looking at life sentences without possibility of parole. What happens now? Richard asked. Now we process them, file formal charges, and prepare for trial. Though given the confessions we just got, I doubt it'll make it to trial. Their lawyers will push for a plea deal to avoid life sentences, but the DA isn't feeling generous. You two should prepare for some media attention once this goes public. Let them come, Isabel said. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. Martha and Thomas wanted to erase me from existence. Instead, I'm going to stand up and show the world exactly what survival looks like. They left the police station as the sun was rising, painting Los Angeles in shades of gold and pink. Richard drove them back to Monterey, both of them quiet, processing everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. It's really over, Isabel said finally. "They're in custody. They can't hurt us anymore." "It's over," Richard confirmed. "Now we get to focus on us, on rebuilding, on living." "On living," Isabel repeated, a smile finally breaking through. God, I'd forgotten what that felt like. The past 7 years, I've just been surviving, going through the motions. But now I get to actually live again. We both do. They spent the rest of the drive planning their future. Tentative, careful plans about where to live, how to merge their old life with the new one, what to tell their friends and family. There would be challenges ahead. Therapy, legal proceedings, media attention. But for the first time in 7 years, those challenges felt manageable. Because they were facing them together. 3 weeks after the arrests, the media storm had finally begun to settle. The story of Isabel Collins, the woman who returned from the dead to bring her would-be murderers to justice, had dominated headlines for days. Reporters camped outside the Monterey beach house until Richard hired security. Talk shows wanted interviews. A streaming service had already reached out about rights to their story. They declined it all. This wasn't entertainment. This was their life. The trial date was set for 8 months out, though the day was confident Martha and Thomas would accept plea deals to avoid the spectacle. Martha had been denied bail. Flight risk and danger to witnesses, Thomas's lawyer had tried, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. They'd remain in county jail until sentencing, 25 years to life. That's what the day was pushing for, given the confessions, the evidence, and the sheer brutality of their crimes. She'd probably get it. But Richard and Isabel weren't focused on Martha and Thomas anymore. They were focused on healing. "Tell me about the nonprofit," Isabel said one morning over coffee on the beach house deck. The Pacific stretched before them, endless in blue. "The one I ran. I've read the articles, seen the mission statement, but I want to hear it from you." Richard smiled, remembering. "Safe Harbor. You founded it 3 years before we met. It provided resources for domestic violence survivors. Housing assistance, job training, legal aid, counseling. You started it after volunteering at a women's shelter during college and realizing how many women fell through the cracks of the system. Did I love it? You were passionate about it. Sometimes to the point of exhaustion. You'd work 60-hour weeks, take calls at midnight from women in crisis. I used to worry you'd burn out." He paused. "The organization folded about 4 years after you disappeared. Your second-in-command tried to keep it going. But without your vision, without the connections you'd built, the funding dried up." Isabel was quiet for a moment. "I want to restart it or something like it. I spent 7 years working minimum wage jobs, living paycheck to paycheck with no support system. I understand now, in a way I didn't before, what it's like to be completely alone and vulnerable. That perspective. It's valuable. Then we'll make it happen. Whatever you need." They spent the morning discussing plans, logistics, funding. Richard had more than enough money. The embezzled funds had been recovered. And his company had continued thriving even through his grief. They could easily capitalize a new nonprofit. But money wasn't the issue. The issue was Isabel herself. "I need therapy," she admitted that afternoon. They were walking the beach, shoes off, waves lapping at their feet. "Real therapy. I've been seeing someone for years about the amnesia, but now I need to process the trauma. What Martha and Thomas did, what I lost, how to integrate Isabel and Lena into one person. I'll go with you. Couples therapy too. We need help navigating this. Who we were, who we are now, who we want to be. You'd do that therapy. Isabel, I'd do anything for us. I already went to therapy after you disappeared. Hated it, but it helped. This time will be different. This time, we're doing it together." They found a therapist who specialized in trauma and amnesia cases, Dr. Sarah Yun, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and zero tolerance for bullshit. Their first session was brutal. "You manipulated her, Doctor," Yun said bluntly to Richard. "With good intentions, perhaps, but manipulation nonetheless. You inserted yourself into Lena's life, used her own lost memories against her, essentially groomed her to fall in love with you again, without giving her the agency to make an informed choice." Richard didn't flinch. "You're right, I did. And I'd do it again because the alternative was watching her live a half-life without ever knowing who she really was. Was it ethical? Probably not. but it was necessary. "Isabel, how does that make you feel?" Isabel was quiet for a long time, conflicted. Part of me is angry that he lied. Part of me understands why he did. And part of me, the biggest part, is just grateful he never gave up, that he loved me enough to spend 7 years searching. But can you trust him now? I don't know, Isabel admitted. I want to, but there's this voice in my head asking, what else would he lie about if he thought it was for my own good? That's something we need to work through. They worked through it, week after week, session after session, peeling back layers of hurt and fear and complicated love. Richard learned to give Isabel space to process at her own pace. Isabel learned to communicate when his hovering became suffocating. They had their first real fight 4 weeks in. Richard had been contacted by a journalist writing a book about their case. He'd declined without consulting Isabel. "You don't get to make those decisions for me," she'd shouted. "This is my story too. My trauma. My life. Stop trying to protect me from everything. I'm sorry, you're right. I should have asked." "Yes, you should have." "I'm not fragile, Richard. I survived 7 years with no memory, no money, no support system. I'm stronger than you give me credit for. I know you are. I watched you almost die once. The thought of anything hurting you again, even emotionally, it makes me crazy." The fight ended with tears and apologies and a promise to communicate better. They called the journalist together and agreed to cooperate on the book, but only if they had editorial approval. Small steps, learning to be partners again instead of protector and protected. Meanwhile, Isabel began reconnecting with her past. Her parents had moved to Arizona after her death. Her mother had never recovered, falling into depression that lasted years. When Richard called to tell them Isabel was alive, her mother had collapsed. Her father wept openly. They flew out to Monterey immediately. The reunion was everything painful and beautiful. Reunions should be. Tears and laughter and disbelief. Her mother held her for 20 minutes straight, sobbing into her hair. Her father kept touching her face like he couldn't believe she was real. "We buried an empty casket," her mother said through tears. "Had a funeral. I gave a eulogy for my daughter, and now you're here. You're really here." "I'm here, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Don't apologize. None of this was your fault. Those monsters. I hope they rot in prison for what they did to you, to all of us." Isabel's best friend from Stanford, Rachel, flew up from San Diego. Their reunion was less tearful, more stunned. "You're supposed to be dead," Rachel said, staring at Isabel like she was a ghost. "I went to your funeral. I gave a speech about that time we got drunk and crashed a frat party dressed as pirates, and now you're sitting here drinking coffee like nothing happened. A lot happened. I just don't remember most of it." They talked for hours, Rachel filling in gaps about their friendship, college adventures, late-night study sessions, the time Isabel had talked Rachel out of dropping out sophomore year. Pieces of Isabel's personality emerged through Rachel's stories. She'd been funny, slightly reckless, fiercely loyal. "I wish I remembered," Isabel said. "All these stories, these experiences, they're mine, but they feel like they belong to someone else." "Then make new memories," Rachel said. "You're alive. That's what matters." "We'll make new stories." The Malibu mansion sold within 2 weeks of listing. Some tech billionaire who didn't care about the property's dark history. Richard and Isabel used the money to buy a smaller house in Monterey, right on the water, nothing ostentatious. Just a comfortable home where they could start fresh. Isabel took the lead on decorating. No more preserving the past like a museum. She chose bright colors, modern furniture, photographs of their present rather than their history. This was their new life, and it deserved its own aesthetic. One evening, as they unpacked boxes in the living room, Isabel found her wedding dress, the one from 7 years ago, carefully preserved in tissue paper. "What should we do with this?" she asked. Richard came to stand beside her, looking at the white silk. "Whatever you want. Keep it. Donate it. Burn it ceremonially on the beach." Isabel laughed. "That's very dramatic." She pulled the dress out, held it up to herself. It still fit. She'd lost weight during the 7 years as Lena, but not much. "I was thinking, for the vow renewal, I could wear it again, as a way of saying that what we had then wasn't erased." It was just interrupted. I love that idea. They set the date for the vow renewal. 6 months out, giving them time to heal, to rebuild, to become the couple they wanted to be, rather than the couple they'd been. In therapy, Dr. Yun pushed them to address the hard questions. What if the memories never fully return? What if there are always gaps? Can you live with that? Yes, Isabel said without hesitation. I'm not just the sum of my memories. I'm also who I've become. Lena Moore isn't a fake identity. She's part of me now. The resilience, the independence, the perspective I gained from those 7 years. I don't want to lose that just to recover memories of what I had before. And you, Richard, can you love who she is now? Not just who she was. Richard looked at Isabel, really looked at her. She was different from the woman he'd married. Harder in some ways, softer in others, more cautious but also braver. She'd survived things that would have broken most people. I fell in love with her twice, he said. Once as Isabel, once as Lena, who she is now. This synthesis of both. She's extraordinary. So yes, I can love who she is now. I already do. Isabel reached for his hand, squeezed it tight, outside the therapy office. In the parking lot, she pulled him into a kiss. Not the tentative, careful kisses they'd shared in recent weeks, but something deeper, something that spoke of promises and futures and love that had survived the impossible. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. For what? For never giving up, for finding me, for loving me even when I didn't know who I was. Always, Richard promised. I will always find you, no matter how lost you get. As they drove home, Isabel's phone buzzed. An email from the director of the women's shelter where she'd worked as Lena. They'd heard about her story, about who she really was. They wanted to honor her, both as Isabel Collins, founder of Safe Harbor, and as Lena Moore, the quiet woman who'd helped so many during her own healing. They're naming their new wing after me, Isabel said. Reading the email, the Collins Moore Center, both names. That's perfect, Richard said. Both parts of you, recognized and honored. Yeah, Isabel agreed, smiling. It really is. They were rebuilding, not just their relationship, but their lives, their identities, their future. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others, but they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. 6 months had passed like a dream, or maybe like waking up from one. The vineyard in Napa Valley was exactly as Isabel had imagined it. Rolling hills covered in grapevines, the late afternoon sun casting everything in golden light. Rows of white chairs sat arranged in a semicircle, facing an arbor decorated with white roses and trailing ivy. 50 guests, carefully selected friends and family who'd supported them through everything. Isabel stood in the vineyard's bridal suite, looking at herself in the mirror. The same wedding dress from 7 years ago fit perfectly, though she'd had it altered slightly. The woman wearing it now wasn't quite the same person who'd worn it the first time. Rachel stood behind her, adjusting the veil. You look beautiful. Again. Still, you know what I mean. I do. Isabel smiled at her reflection. She'd regained more memories over the past months. Not everything, but enough. There were still gaps, blank spaces where experiences should be. But Dr. Yun had been right. She was more than just her memories. She was the synthesis of Isabel and Lena, and that made her stronger than she'd ever been before. Her mother knocked and entered, eyes already misty. Oh, sweetheart, you're stunning. Don't cry yet, Mom. Save it for the ceremony. Too late. Her mother dabbed at her eyes. I never thought I'd see this day after we lost you. After we thought we'd lost you. I never imagined we'd get this. A second chance. Isabel hugged her tightly. I'm here. I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere. Outside, guests were taking their seats. Richard stood at the arbor with James as his best man, looking nervous despite having done this before. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, the late afternoon light catching the silver at his temples that hadn't been there 7 years ago. You okay? James asked quietly. I'm terrified, Richard admitted. What if this time is different? What if saying the vows again somehow breaks the spell and she realizes she could do better? Richard, she literally came back from the dead for you. I think you're safe. Richard laughed despite his nerves. Fair point. The music started. Not the traditional wedding march, but the Miles Davis song that had been playing when Isabel's memories first began to return. Blue and green, haunting and beautiful and perfectly them. Isabel appeared at the end of the aisle, and Richard's breath caught. 7 years ago, she'd walked this walk as a young woman full of optimism and dreams. Now she walked as a survivor, a fighter, someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. She was breathtaking. Their eyes met, and everything else faded. The guests, the vineyard, the photographers, none of it mattered. There was only her, walking toward him, choosing him again despite everything. When she reached the arbor, Richard took her hands. They were trembling slightly, both of them nervous, both of them overwhelmed. The officiant, an old friend of Richard's father, smiled warmly. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness something truly extraordinary. 7 years ago, Richard and Isabel stood before their loved ones and promised forever. That forever was interrupted by violence, by cruelty, by circumstances beyond their control, but it was not broken. Today, they stand before us again, tested, changed, but still committed to the promises they made." Richard squeezed Isabel's hands. "Richard and Isabel have written their own vows for today, Richard. Would you like to begin?" Richard cleared his throat, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Isabel, 7 years ago, I promised to love you through every season, through sunshine and storms. I had no idea how tested that promise would be. When I lost you, when I thought I'd lost you, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away. I spent 7 years searching, hoping, refusing to believe you were gone. And then, impossibly, I found you, not as the woman I'd lost, but as someone new, someone who'd survived things that would have destroyed most people." Tears were streaming down Isabel's face now, but she was smiling. "You've taught me that love isn't just about the good times. It's about the searching, the waiting, the refusing to give up even when everyone tells you to move on. Today, I make my promises again, but with full knowledge of what they mean. I promise to love every version of you. Isabel, Lena, whoever you become. I promise to let you be strong, even when my instinct is to protect you. I promise to build a future with you, not just recreate the past. And I promise that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, I will never stop fighting for us." He slipped a new wedding band onto her finger, not replacing the old one, but joining it. 2 rings, 2 ceremonies, 1 endless love. The officiant turned to Isabel. "Isabel," she took a shaky breath. "Richard, when I woke up in that hospital 7 years ago with no memory, no identity, no past, I was a blank slate. I had to build a life from nothing, build a personality from scratch. And somewhere in the building, some part of me remembered you, not consciously, but deeper than that. My soul remembered." Richard's eyes were red now, tears threatening. "When you walked into that restaurant and looked at me like I was your entire world, something in me recognized you, even though I didn't know why, even though I couldn't remember our history. I knew you were important. I knew you were home. Over these past months, I've remembered a lot. I've remembered our wedding, our life together, the woman I was before, but I've also discovered who I am now. And the beautiful thing is, I would choose you either way, as Isabel, as Lena, as whoever I am. I would always choose you." She reached into her bouquet and pulled out a ring, Richard's wedding band from 7 years ago, the one that had been in the safe at the mansion. "This was yours. You gave it back when you thought you'd lost me. I'm giving it to you again now. Not as a replacement, but as a promise that I'm here, I'm real, and I'm yours, for all the forevers we have left." She slipped it onto his finger, too, and Richard pulled her close, kissing her before the officiant could even finish the ceremony. The guests laughed and cheered. The officiant shook his head, grinning. "Well, I suppose that makes it official, ladies and gentlemen. I present to you, again, Mr. and Mrs. Collins." The reception was a blur of joy. Toasts were made. James telling embarrassing stories about Richard's 7 years of obsessive searching. Rachel sharing memories of the old Isabel while celebrating the new one. Isabel's father gave a speech that had everyone in tears, thanking Richard for never giving up on his daughter. As the sun set and string lights illuminated the vineyard, Richard and Isabel had their first dance. The same song as 7 years ago, but everything was different. Better somehow, because they knew exactly how fragile this happiness was. "I can't believe we made it here," Isabel whispered, her head on Richard's shoulder. "I never doubted we would." "Liar." But she was smiling. "You doubted every single day." "Okay, yes. But I never stopped hoping." They swayed together, surrounded by loved ones, in a moment of perfect peace. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Isabel stood at the edge of the vineyard, looking out at the rolling hills. Richard came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The future. We've spent so much time dealing with the past, recovering it, processing it, healing from it. But now we get to just live. And what does that look like? Living. I don't know yet. That's the exciting part." She turned to him. "Maybe we travel, see the world together, make new memories in places I don't have any old ones. Maybe we focus on the new Safe Harbor initiative. Maybe we just spend a year doing nothing but being happy and boring and normal." I like the sound of that. Boring and normal. They stood together as stars emerged overhead, holding hands, looking toward a future that finally felt possible. Behind them, unnoticed in the shadows near the parking area, a woman watched the celebration. She was tall, slender, with chestnut hair similar to Isabel's but streaked with blonde. She held a faded photograph. 3 people on a beach, 2 girls and a boy. The girls were identical, maybe 6 years old. The woman's finger traced the face of one of the children, then looked up at adult Isabel laughing with Richard in the distance. "So you really don't remember me, sister," she whispered to herself. "They took that from you too." She tucked the photograph back into her purse and turned away, disappearing into the night as quietly as she'd arrived. But inside the purse, barely visible, was another item, a newspaper clipping about Martha Jenkins's trial, with certain sentences highlighted. Testimony about a second daughter, a twin, separated at birth and adopted by different families. Information Martha had discovered while researching Isabel's background. Information she'd planned to use somehow, but never got the chance. The woman walked to her car, got in, and sat for a moment staring at the vineyard where her sister celebrated a second wedding. "Soon," she promised herself. "Soon, Isabel. When you're ready, when you're strong enough, I'll come back, and you'll remember. You'll remember both of us." She started the engine and drove away, leaving only questions in her wake. Back at the reception, Isabel shivered suddenly. "Cold?" Richard asked, already moving to get his jacket. "No, just, I don't know, a weird feeling, like someone was watching." Richard looked around but saw nothing. "Probably just reporters. Security will handle them." "Yeah, probably." But the feeling lingered as they returned to the celebration, a sense of something unfinished, some piece of her past still missing, still waiting to be discovered. She shook it off. Tonight wasn't about the past. Tonight was about the future, about love that had survived the impossible, about second chances and new beginnings. Richard pulled her back onto the dance floor, and Isabel let herself be swept up in the moment. Whatever shadows lurked at the edges of her memory, whatever mysteries remained unsolved, they could wait. Tonight, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Finally, impossibly, home.